I was just getting ready to send it to you. Okay. Well, good evening, everybody. Hoping everybody's having a good day, enjoying life, living life, loving life. We're on again tonight talking about the Lieber code. And if you look in the chat bar there, you'll see I left my links to my other platforms and my PayPal link for anybody that's interested in sending me some love. Always appreciate it. Any bit is helpful. Then you'll also see I put in a note there, Perils of Peace, Jessica Reich PDF. If you look that up, that's basically what the martial law is. It's talking about the perils of peace, and they're talking about the public health system, the burden of the public health system on the government in regards to immigrants and people that aren't actually part of the system. Sound familiar? So let me get on with screen sharing. We're going to continue on with Article 14 this week. And I'm going to assume everybody can see my page here. And if we look at 13 last week, we talked about military jurisdiction is of two kinds. First, that which is conferred and defined by statute, and that's your person. And second, that which is derived from the common law of war, which is your physical presence, your physical being. Your person is the private or the public side, and your physical being is the private side. One is public venue, the other is private venue. Military necessity, as understood by modern civilized nations, consists in the necessity of those measures which are indispensable for securing the ends of the war, and which are lawful according to the modern law and usages of war. And when we talk about usages of war, one of the usages of the military necessity is a commercial system for equality. It doesn't say for equity. It says for equality. Very distinct difference. Article 15 says military necessity admits of all direct destruction of life or limb of armed enemies. Armed enemies. Military necessity admits of all direct destruction of life or limb of armed enemies. That's why they are weaponized. And if you're carrying, whether it's carrying concealed or carry open, or Second Amendment right, just don't care about their laws. You're an enemy and you're armed, and military necessity admits of all direct destruction of life or limb. That's one of their principles. And of other persons whose destruction is incidentally unavoidable in the armed contests of war. So again, military necessity admits of all direct destruction of life or limb of armed enemies, that is the private being. This is the admiralty liability. And other persons is the public person whose destruction, it was constructed, it wasn't created, it was constructed. Now if it's destructed, is incidentally unavoidable in the armed contests of war. It allows of the capturing of every armed enemy and every enemy of importance to the hostile government, or of peculiar danger to the captor, or of peculiar danger to the captor. So if your person is a danger to the captor because they're afraid you're going to come after them in their personal capacity, they have a lot of different means of excuses, people. Pay attention. It allows of all destruction of property and obstruction of the ways and channels of traffic, travel, or communication, and of all withholding of sustenance or means of life from the enemy, and of such deception as does not involve the breaking of good faith. That's the kicker right there, good faith. Even contracts are supposed to be done in good faith. Either positively pledged, and this is where they're getting, this is the energy that they talk about when people talk about they're sucking the energy out of you. Because every time you pledge something through a registration, it's either positively pledged. You positively pledged it because you signed it, and they have a definitive wet ink signature. An electronic record doesn't have that definitive wet ink signature, so it couldn't be discerned as positively pledged. Void contract. I've made a note about that today on my Facebook page if you go look at that. Regarding agreements entered into during the war or supposed by the modern law of war to exist. It's supposed by the modern law of war that the agreement has been entered. And if it's been supposed by the modern law of war that the agreement has been entered, then you have to act peacefully. Doesn't matter how they want to define you or not. None of that matters. Doesn't matter whether they want to define it open carry or concealed carry or whatever. It's not a firearm. It's not a firearm. It's a defensive implement, if you want to put it some way. You have to learn how to get away from their language. Men who take up arms against one another in public war do not cease on this account to be moral beings, responsible to one another and to God. Men who take up arms against one another in public war do not cease on this account. Remember, if you take up an arm in public, that merely means to be able to fend for yourself. It doesn't mean a firearm. It just means to take up arms. It means to fend for yourself in whatever means necessary. So if you determine that somebody's using a gun against somebody, you have the right to use just as much deadly force. But if you don't have a gun, that means you can use as much deadly force as you can come up with that would equal a gun. That means if you have the means to kick the guy in the nuts, kick the guy in the nuts. The means to kick the guy in the face, kick the guy in the face. You have the means to throw a knife at him and hit him in the right spot, do so. Whatever means necessary. But the first step should always be peaceful. Always. You have the right to take up arms, but you should do so in peace, and that is responsible to one another and to God. Vengeance is mine, saith the Lord. Picking up arms should be the last resort. 16. Military necessity does not admit of cruelty. There is no means that they could admit to being cruel. If they deem it necessary to cut off your arms so you can't fight them, they're going to cut off your arms, and it's deemed necessary. That is the infliction of suffering for the sake of suffering or for revenge, nor of maiming or wounding except in fight, nor of torture to extort confessions. It does not admit of the use of poison in any way, nor of the wanton devastation of a district, nor of the wanton devastation of a district. There's an important word, huh, folks? What is it that's different about district? Territory of jurisdiction. District, with its roots of distingere, draw apart. Huh. Now you know what they're using for the divisional tactics. This is why they have Republican districts and Democratic districts and liberal districts and federal districts and state districts and county districts, because you don't have your own district. War is not, it admits of deception. Okay? Military necessity does not admit of cruelty. It does not admit of any of this stuff here. It does not admit of the wanton devastation of a district. It does not admit of poison. It does not admit of torture or extortion of confessions. It does not admit of wounding except in fighting. The infliction of suffering or for the sake of suffering or for revenge. It doesn't admit to any of that. That's why these cops get on the stand and lie. It does admit of deception, but disclaims acts of perfidy. Deceitfulness, untrustworthiness, but disclaims acts of untrustworthiness. Disclaims that deceitful. It admits there's deceit, but they will disclaim that they are the ones being deceitful. They're just doing their jobs. Somebody else told them to do it. And in general, military necessity does not include any act of hostility which makes the return to peace unnecessarily difficult. In other words, military necessity includes peace. Peace in convenience and not unnecessarily difficultness. It's important when you go into court, you mention to help sustain the budgets of the state and the federal government. I ask for expediency in these matters. Discharge, order for discharge immediately. It's one of the points. You're gonna, for military necessity, managing their budget, you're gonna ask peacefully and not act with any hostility that would make it unnecessarily difficult and expensive on the state's budget. 17, war is not carried on by arms alone. Again, reaffirming that it first necessitates a substantiation of peace, a comprehension of what is peace in order to get back to it. It is lawful to starve the hostile belligerent, armed or unarmed, so that it leads to the speedier subjection of the enemy. It is lawful to starve the hostile belligerent. This is why I say, come in peace. If you're going to go armed and be belligerent, that's a mistake. I'm telling you from my own experience. I got away lucky. I really do. I really did. I got away lucky. Those people, I was doing some stuff you normally don't do. Armed or unarmed, so that it leads to the speedier subjection of the enemy. Does it sound familiar? You remember the gulags and stuff in the pictures that you see from the Holocaust? Article 18, when a commander of a besieged place expels the non-combatants in order to lessen the number of those who consume his stock of provisions, it is lawful, though an extreme measure, to drive them back so as to hasten on the surrender. Article 19, commanders, whenever admissible, inform the enemy of their intention to bombard a place so that the non-combatants, and especially the women and children, may be removed before the bombardment commences. But it is no infraction of the common law of war to admit thus to inform the enemy. Surprise may be a necessity. No, not warrants. You get it, people? Do you get it? Article 20. Public war is a state of armed hostility between sovereign nations or governments. The armed hostility in this matter is the uniformed policy enforcers that are a standing army, privately based, and being compensated through public funds. It is a law and requisite of civilized existence that men live in political, continuous societies, forming organized units called states or nations, whose constituents bear, enjoy, suffer, advance, and retrograde together in peace and in war. You have to know war in order to know peace, and you have to know peace in order to know war. If you think you know war and you've never been to war, then maybe you're defining the wrong war. In the realm that we see here today, this military war is actually a spiritual war being done through a commercial venue. He is a respecter of no persons. And the entire commercial venue is nothing but persons. And that is the war. And they commercialize everything. period. Article 21. The citizen or native of a hostile country is thus an enemy. The citizen or native of a hostile country is thus an enemy. As one of the constituents of the hostile state or nation, and as such is subjected to the hardships of war. Privatized prisons. Privatized prisons, right there is the hardships of war, because it's a commercial war, which plays on the spirituality through personage. Article 22. Nevertheless, as civilization has advanced during the last centuries, so has likewise steadily advanced, especially in war on land, the distinction between the private individual belonging to a hostile country and the hostile country itself with its men in arms. Especially in war on land, the distinction between the private individual belonging to a hostile country and the hostile country itself with its men in arms. The hostile country here being the United States, a private entity. With its men in arms, all hired privately. The principle has been more and more acknowledged that the unarmed citizen is to be spared in person, property, and honor as much as the exigencies of war will admit. Here I'll put the Sapri Doctrine. Okay, if you look in the chat bar, you'll see it says, what is Sapri Doctrine? Sapri Doctrine is a legal concept that gives courts the power to interpret the terms of a will, gift, or charitable trust. This doctrine will become active if the intended wishes or conditions of the original document cannot be carried out, be legitimately interpreted literally or legally performed. Sapri gives the court the flexibility to understand the perceived intent of the donor or testator and implement their wishes. The term has its origin. The term has its origin, or the term as its origin is what it should be. As its origin is an old French phrase, Sapri comme possible, which in translation means as near as possible. The Sapri allows the wishes of the creator of a charitable trust, gift, or will to be carried out in many cases. If it were not for this power, there would be instances in which the phrasing in the document would make it null and void legally and thus impossible to implement. Let me go back to my screen sharing. So we see the principle has been more and more acknowledged that the unarmed citizen Again, this is why I say be peaceful. The unarmed citizen is to be spared in person, property, and honor, as much as the exigencies of war will admit. This is uniform with near as may be. The Supreme Doctrine, as it's applied in the commercial system, it also applies in the martial law, the military. Again, the uniformity throughout all jurisdictions, like wording, as near as may be. And this is why, again, or just another basis of proof of the martial law is the commercial law. And as long as we understand that, we can hold them to that commercial law through the Lieber Code. Okay, and one last one. Article 23, private citizens are no longer murdered, enslaved, or carried off to distant parts. And the inoffensive individual is as little disturbed in his private relations as the commander of the hostile troops can afford to grant in the overruling demands of a vigorous war. Private citizens are no longer murdered, enslaved, or carried off to distant parts. The hell they aren't, just not done so as much as it used to be. But again, they are admitting that private citizens were murdered, enslaved, and carried off to distant parts. Okay. So with that, we've got almost 10 minutes left. I'm going to open the board. And remember, folks, I need your input. So say whatever you need to. Make any comments, complaints, concerns, compliments. We need to realize that everything that they do in the commercial system is a matter of martial law. And that's why when they give you all these court citations, you go into court and you see the Admiralty flag. See, Admiralty is the liability side of the maritime. When they come in contract, that's a responsibility. You're held to responsibilities. If you breach that responsibility in the commercial realm, you have a liability in the military realm, the martial law realm, the Lieber Code. All based on commercial treaties, peace treaties. Anything? Anybody? And I know I went through a lot of that stuff quick, but again, let me grab this site that we're reading from. And I'll post that in the links here as well, or in the chat section. So anybody that's new, this is where we're reading from. The Lieber Code Articles 100 is when they ended the Civil War and instituted the new banking system under bankruptcy. They had already borrowed the money for war, and throughout the war bankrupted themselves, and through supposed peace treaty instituted the martial law, which was commerce. They instituted a commercial construction, which wasn't finalized. It was just a set of codes that was followed throughout the states on a set of as a standard, and it was finalized in 1952. Was the construction of the Uniform Commercial Code. And again, that's why I referenced uniform throughout all jurisdictions, and it is. Like wording says in the Supreme Doctrine, which is one of the things that they follow in probating wills in the states, as near as may be. Some records can't be perfect. So when we're correcting the mistakes, we have to get them as near as may be. Anybody got anything? Nothing? Well, if that's it, I'm going to go ahead and shut it down and let everybody know I appreciate you showing up and spending time with me tonight, with us.
Thank you, Keith.
Yes, thank you, Katrina. Remember, if it wasn't for you guys, I wouldn't be doing this. So God bless. I love you. Remember to share, share, share. And if you feel like really sharing some love, hit that PayPal link. In the meantime, we'll see you next time. Thanks for joining us, guys, gals.